right, so today we're doing a deep dive on custom AI, and specifically Amazon Bedrock. Um, we hear a lot about tailoring pre-trained AI models to make them, really yours to use, and this has kind of gone beyond just hype. I mean, it's a pretty big deal, right?
Yeah, for sure. And we've been hearing, like you said, about these foundation models, these large language models, for a while now. But I think what's really interesting and really groundbreaking is this idea that you can mold them, right? You can mold them with your own data, specialize them. And that's kind of what we're going to be unpacking today with these blog posts, looking at the AWS blog posts on this, as well as the Bedrock developer experience page.
Yeah, that's a great point. So they highlight two main methods here: fine-tuning and continued pre-training. So I think of it almost like if you have a chef who's, they're good at cooking a lot of things, but then you can give them some specialized training, like in French pastry or something.
I like that analogy. So fine-tuning is almost like taking that chef and giving them a few intensive lessons on perfecting croissants. You're taking a model that's already good at a general task, maybe like summarizing text, and you're training it further on a specific data set.
So can you give me like a real-world example? How does that actually play out?
Yeah, so imagine you want to analyze customer feedback for your online store, right? You could fine-tune a model like Cohere Command Light on your own customer reviews. And by doing that, now the model understands the nuances of your customer's language. So it can start to, for example, better identify positive sentiment even when, the wording isn't super enthusiastic.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So fine-tuning is really about, laser focus. What about continued pre-training?
So this is where we send our chef to culinary school in France for a year. We're not just teaching them how to make a certain pastry, we're really expanding their knowledge base.
Yeah.
And with continued pre-training, we're not just tweaking a few skills, we're fundamentally expanding the model's knowledge base.
So is that where something like the Amazon Titan text model would come in?
Exactly. So let's say you wanted an AI that really, really, truly understood financial jargon. Not just like dictionary definitions, but the way that people use it in shareholder letters or market analysis reports. Continued pre-training on that kind of massive data set is how you would really get to that level of depth.
So it's less about, a specific task that you want it to do, but more about shaping the overall, the AI's understanding of like a certain domain.
Exactly, yeah. It's about developing a fluency in a particular language, in this case, the complex language of finance.
Okay, so now I'm starting to get the distinction. Fine-tuning versus continued pre-training. But how do we know if these custom models are actually performing well? We were talking about, integrating them into business decisions. It's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you'd want to evaluate, a chef's performance after you've trained them, you need to assess your AI models, right? And that's where Amazon Bedrock's model evaluation comes in. And they have both automatic and human evaluation. So it's kind of like a two-layered approach to quality control.
Okay, let's break down those two layers. What does automatic evaluation involve?
So that's kind of your first line of assessment. It's like those standardized tests that, chefs might take just to prove their basic knowledge. With automatic evaluation, you essentially choose the metrics that matter most for your use case.
So if I'm really focused on accuracy, for example, I would tell Bedrock that.
Exactly. So you could assess accuracy. You could look at robustness, which is how well the model handles unexpected inputs. You can even look at fairness to minimize bias. And Bedrock can run those tests using the data sets that you choose and then spit out like a performance report for each model. So it gives you a really quick data-driven snapshot of how well each model is doing.
So that's super helpful for quick comparison. But what about the more nuanced stuff, like brand voice, for example? How do you measure that? Those are things that maybe you can't put a metric to.
And that's where the human evaluation comes in. That's what we'll be exploring next.
Yes, so automatic evaluation, that gives you that initial data. But human evaluation is where you bring in the humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like having, the actual food critics come in and taste the chef's creations. They're not just looking at like, did you chop the carrots correctly? They're looking at the overall quality, the creativity, does it actually align with like the brand of the restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
All of that.
So instead of judging a souffle, we're judging how well an AI model can, reflect our brand voice, or if it really understands, the ins and outs of our industry.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're building a chat bot for your company's customer service, automatic evaluation can tell you like, okay, because answer the questions correctly. But a human can tell you, does it sound friendly? Is it actually helpful? Does it sound like your company? Right. That's such an important distinction.
Right.
So how does that actually work, the human evaluation? Do I need to like assemble a panel of AI whisperers?
No, it's more straightforward than you might think. You can use your own team to do these evaluations or even have AWS manage it for you. But essentially, you'll be providing guidelines and criteria, and these evaluators, they'll be reviewing the model outputs, giving feedback on clarity, relevance, just the overall quality.
Okay, so you're really bringing that human judgment into it, especially for those subjective things that are just really hard to quantify. Like, it's like the final quality check before you release your AI baby into the world.
Exactly. And I think that level of control is really essential here, right? Because we're talking about integrating AI into workflows that impact real people. So it's not just about does it technically work, but does it actually align with our values and our expectations?
And speaking of expectations, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit to the more practical side of things. So we've talked about why we customize, but what about the how? The blog post mentioned that, there are different formats or considerations for fine-tuning versus continued pre-training. So what do we need to know about actually prepping our data for all this AI magic?
Yeah, you're right. They say garbage in, garbage out. So both fine-tuning and continued pre-training require you to structure your data in a way that the AI can actually work with it. Think of it like this. You're giving ingredients to a chef. You got to prep those ingredients, you got to organize them, or the recipe's not going to work. Both methods require your data to be in JSON lines format. And this is basically a standard way to structure data for machine learning.
JSON lines format. That sounds a little intimidating. Can you break that down a little bit further?
Of course, yeah. Basically, imagine you're writing down instructions for our chef, but each step has to be on a separate line, clearly labeled so the chef knows exactly what to do. And that's kind of what JSON lines format is doing. For fine-tuning specifically, you need both a prompt and a completion for each piece of data. So for example, let's say you're teaching the model to generate really creative ad copy. The prompt would be like a brief description of the product, and then the completion would be like an example of a really compelling ad you've already written for that product.
So you're showing it the question and the ideal answer.
Exactly. So it has a very clear example to learn from. Now, continued pre-training is a bit different. You're not providing those specific answers. You're kind of immersing the model in your domain. So it's more like giving our chef free reign in a market filled with, ingredients specific to Japanese cuisine or something.
So if I wanted to train an AI to write in the style of, let's say, Stephen King, I would feed it all of his book.
Exactly. You got it. It's about absorbing that overall style and language, not just learning these kind of input-output pairs.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Cost. I know our listeners are always thinking about the bottom line. And the blog post did mention that, pricing for model customization, storage, and what they call inference can vary.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, especially with the new technology like this. So how does pricing actually work with Amazon Bedrock?
Well, it's broken down into three main areas, basically. Customization, storage, and what they call inference. Almost like thinking back to our chef analogy, it's like building a custom kitchen for our superstar chef.
Okay, I like that. Break that down for me.
So customization is kind of like the construction cost, right? It's the actual compute power and all the resources that are used to train your model. And that's charged based on the amount of data or tokens that you process multiplied by the number of training cycles. You might also see this called epochs that you run.
So if my data set is, pretty big and I need to run a bunch of training cycles, that means my customization costs are going to be higher.
Exactly. It's like adding more square footage, maybe some fancy details to our custom kitchen. Then you've got storage costs. So that's for your custom model, right? It's like paying rent for that really nice kitchen space we just built. And that's charged monthly based on how big your model is.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got the building of it, we've got the storage. What about actually using it? Like the cooking, so to speak?
That's where the inference comes in. So this is what you pay when you actually use your model to do its thing. Generate text, translate languages, whatever task you've trained it to do. Going back to our chef, this is like the utilities and the ingredients. And you can actually choose between a provisioned throughput option, which is kind of like a monthly utility plan, or you can go with just straight up hourly pricing if your usage is a bit more sporadic.
So with the provision throughput, I'm basically picking a baseline level of usage, and then I pay extra if I go over.
Exactly, you got it. It's all about finding that right balance between, what you need and what your budget is. And speaking of finding the right balance, one thing I really liked in the Bedrock developer experience page is that they emphasize that you can actually test drive these custom models before you go all in.
That's really good to know. I mean, that takes a lot of the risk away. So how does that work?
Yeah. So With that provision throughput, you can actually start with a really limited number of what they call model units, and you just pay hourly. So it's like a test run for your new AI teammate, right? And you
Mhm.
can see how it performs in the real world before you commit to that larger plan.
So that really opens it up for businesses of all sizes to at least experiment with custom AI, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And that's what's so exciting about this whole space, you know? Small businesses, they can personalize their marketing campaigns, they can automate those customer service tasks, they can even start to unlock insights from their data that maybe they couldn't see before. And it's all thanks to these custom AI models.
It's like having a whole team of specialists, but without, having to pay a whole team of specialists. So
Right.
we've covered a lot today. The nuts and bolts of fine-tuning, continued pre-training,
Yeah.
why model evaluation is so important, and then, that all-important question of cost. So for our listeners out there who are, ready to dive in and use this stuff, what would you say is like the key takeaway? What should they remember?
Honestly, don't be afraid to just experiment. Jump in. Amazon Bedrock gives you all the tools, the resources, to customize these models, evaluate them with so much precision. You can really tailor these powerful technologies to exactly what you need. So test different models, play around with the customization, and just see what you can do.
Because you never know. You might just find that next big thing. All right, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Amazon Bedrock. It's been fun.